In this module this week, we've been looking at the language of praise in the Psalter, and the third type of song of praise that we want to look at in this segment are the Psalms of confidence. Spurgeon says that the highest science, the loftiest speculation, the mightiest philosophy which can ever engage the attention of the children of God is the name, the nature, the person, the work, the doings, and the existence of the great God whom he calls Father. The thing that gives us confidence in life is not our own abilities, our own effectiveness, but we find confidence, we find security in trusting in the Lord. And the Psalms of confidence are those Psalms that express that kind of trust and faith and confidence in God. Now, we've already looked at the laments that the psalmist often prayed when he was in times of difficulty and trouble. And one of the things that would be in those prayers, even in the midst of his difficulty, would be a confession of trust, where the psalmist would say, I'm going through these difficulties, life is falling apart, but I believe that God is there. He's my protector, He's my defender, He's my source of security and confidence. We have one of those in the lament that's found in Psalm 3. David, in this psalm, is under attack from his own son, Absalom, who wants to remove him from the throne. And in his lament, David describes this situation, and he says, "O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God." But in the midst of this attack, David expresses that his confidence and his security is still in God. And he's going to say in verse 3, "But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill." David has such confidence that God is going to answer his prayer that he speaks as if God has already delivered him, even when he's in the midst of the difficulty. David says, "I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around." David is under attack from thousands of people, and so he does the logical thing that any person would do. He lies down and he takes a nap. Now, that's not the logical thing, but David is able to do that because his confidence and his source of security is in God. And so the Psalms of confidence are those places where a confession of trust, like what we have in Psalm 3, becomes the entire psalm. The best example that we have of the Psalm of confidence is Psalm 23. The Lord is the psalmist's shepherd. He leads him, He provides for him, He protects him, He guides him, He prepares a table for him in the midst of his enemies, and the psalmist knows that because of God's protection, he's absolutely secure. The Psalm of confidence that I want to focus on in this segment is Psalm 46. And this psalm, which is one of my favorites and probably familiar to most all of us, begins by saying that God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble. And to describe the level of security and confidence that we can have in God, the psalmist imagines the two worst experiences, the two greatest disasters that he can possibly envision. And he says, even in those situations, we have absolute security in God. The first situation that he envisions is a catastrophic storm, that there's an earthquake that has affected and impacted the entire earth. And so he says in verse 2, "Therefore we will not fear, even though the earth gives way. Though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling." We're imagining an earthquake here that affects the entire world. This is the Indian Ocean tsunami on a worldwide scale. This is Hurricane Katrina in a way that is affecting every city and every nation on the face of the earth. And he uses a great deal of powerful imagery to describe this. The earth itself is about to fall into the midst of the sea. The mountains are moving, they're trembling, and the Hebrew word that describes their quaking here is the Hebrew verb mot. And then he says the waters are roaring and foaming. The Hebrew words hama and chamar that picture these waters as battering and raging and churned up because of this powerful storm. The one place on earth that is secure as this storm is raging is the city of Jerusalem. And the psalmist says, because of God's presence in this city, the rest of the world may be falling apart, but we are safe and we are secure, and we know that God is going to protect us. He says in verse 5, God is in the midst of her, she shall not be moved. God will help her when the morning dawns. The rest of the world is trembling and shaking. Jerusalem will not be moved because God is present with this city. And what we can imagine here is almost like in the cartoons where a tree is being cut down and this branch that's hanging in the air is the only thing that remains. The only place that is safe and secure in the entire earth is this one tiny city of Jerusalem. And the reason it's safe is because of the presence of God. In the second half of the psalm, the psalmist imagines the second greatest disaster that he can envision. And now the situation is not a storm that affects the world. The situation is an enemy that is invading the city. The attack of an army that is intent on destroying Jerusalem. And so the first part of the psalm talks about a natural disaster. The second part of the psalm talks about a man-made disaster. And the same kind of imagery that was used to describe the earthquake is used also to describe the enemy invasion. The psalmist says in verse 6, the nations rage, the kingdoms totter. There we have the word moat, the same word that was used for the tottering of the mountains. He utters his voice and the earth melts. The earth again is crumbling. And these nations are raging, Hamah, picturing them as waters that are surging and churning, and they're trying to attack the city of Jerusalem. And the Lord and the psalmist says, the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. And because of that, we're absolutely secure. In the last part of the psalm, the psalmist makes the application, and he says there are two things that you need to do. Number one, behold the works of the Lord. Look at what God has done. And then in verse 10, be still and know that I'm God. Stop worrying. Stop being anxious. Stop being concerned. Be quiet and be still, because the Lord is going to protect us and the Lord is able to watch over us. These Psalms are describing for us that it doesn't matter what type of situation we're facing. We are absolutely bulletproof when we're under God's protection. The Psalms of confidence do not mean that believers will never experience hardship, difficulty, or extreme circumstances. Psalm 46 is imagining the two worst disasters that you can ever think of. But if God could protect His people in a storm that affects the entire earth, and if God can protect Jerusalem when it's attacked by an enemy that has conquered the entire earth, then God can deliver us as well. Now, in some ways, we hear the words of these songs, of this song, and it sounds just like a song. A song doesn't guarantee anything. There are many times when at a pep rally, a school sings a song and they go out and lose the next day, 49-0. If there's not a reality behind the song doesn't mean anything. But it's interesting to consider that the historical background for Psalm 46 may actually be a real historical event. In 701 BC, the city of Jerusalem was under attack from the Assyrian army. And the Assyrian king was demanding the unconditional surrender of the city of Jerusalem from King Hezekiah. And in the midst of this difficult situation, when the city of Jerusalem was surrounded by 180,000 enemy troops, Hezekiah went into the temple and he prayed for God's deliverance. And the Lord delivered the city. And 2 Kings and the book of Isaiah tell us that in the middle of the night, the angel of the Lord went out and delivered the city of Jerusalem. He destroyed the Assyrian army, and the Assyrian king got on his horse and went back to his city. The psalm is not promising that we will never experience difficulty. The psalm is promising that God protects us in the midst of that. And there is a reality, there is a true story, there is a basis behind this psalm. The prophet Isaiah says in Isaiah 26:3, "The Lord will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are stayed on Him." And the source of our confidence, the source of our trust, the source of our security in life is not that we will never go through difficulties. The source of our security is that God is our refuge, God is our fortress, and He's always with us and will never forsake us.